Getting ready to take on spring? Make your first move with the reliable performance and power of Steel battery tools. From hedge trimmers and mowers to string trimmers and more, save on select Steel battery tools. Right now, save $50 on the FSA 57 battery trimmer set. Real Steel. Find yours at steeldealers.com. With AK-10 battery and AL101 charger, offer valid for limited time only while supplies last. See participating dealer for details.
What are you looking for in a new smart TV? 4K picture quality? High quality and immersive sound? A sleek design? All of those are givens, but only the new Roku Pro Series has all of those and the Roku streaming experience, an award-winning OS. Get fast, easy access to all your apps like iHeart, where you can stream all your favorite music, radio, and podcasts all day, and regular all-inclusive trips to Roku City. The new Roku Pro Series, a smart TV built by the streaming pros.
It's time to get inside the Giants Huddle.
Let's go, let's go, let's go!
On Giants.com.
I like it, I like it.
And the Giants mobile app.
Boom, give me some juice.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's roll.
Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle Podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmeelk. Our special guest today, as we continue through our off-season episodes of the Giants Huddle Podcast, is Matthew Coller, who's an author of an excellent book called Football's a Numbers Game. It talks about how PFF, Pro Football Focus, came to be and how it's really impacted the NFL. Matthew, thanks so much for being with us, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm still getting used to, after all these years of covering the Vikings, this is my day-to-day job, of the news cycle of the NFL. So there's, we're in the midst of OTA overreactions and random rumors that pop up that you have to dispel and so forth. But I'm having a good time in the off season here.
Yeah, needless to say, in the offseason, I got many fans asking me about the Vikings trying to trade Justin Jefferson. And I'm just kind of sitting there like, yep, guys, nope, they're not going to do that. They actually just decided not to pay a veteran quarterback just so they could pay a guy like Justin Jefferson. So I know exactly where you're coming from on that.
Yeah, but that doesn't get you many clicks or retweets on social media if you say that. I just want to shout out to all the jersey swap people who spend their time making Justin Jefferson a Los Angeles Charger or an Arizona Cardinal or all that. I think that you wasted your time, because the Vikings have said repeatedly, we're going to give an extension to Justin Jefferson. It will happen eventually, but it's not even training camp yet. Most of these contracts, some of them are getting signed now, but a lot of them, they go into training camp when it's, a big negotiation. So just what did Aaron Rodgers say the one time? RELAX probably for everybody. So that's what I would say about it. But aside from that, rookie quarterback here in Minnesota is interesting to keep an eye on. So things are good.
Yeah, we're recording this on May 30th, so who knows what's going to happen between now and when this thing airs. But we've had Jalen Waddle come down today. We had Nico Collins come down. So the wide receiver market kind of continues to settle itself here as we move forward. Always something fun to keep an eye on. And we're going to touch on the Vikings at the end here, because the Giants do open up their season against Minnesota to try to get some insight as to what's going on with the Vikings. But let's start with the book here, man. And why don't we start first? Because I'm not sure how many people understand how ridiculous the start of Pro Football Focus was and how it began with Neil Hornsby. Why don't we go through that? We'll touch on how the Giants kind of contributed to its rise and kind of where it is today.
Yeah, I mean, to say the Giants contributed is understating it. The Giants played a huge role in PFF becoming what it was. Excuse me. But Neil Hornsby, the founder of Pro Football Focus, was more or less a random football fan in England who just kind of became obsessed with the game through a magazine that he found, some games that were on television that he could find in England, and radio broadcasts that they had, the military radio station that he could get to come in. And he started to really become a huge fan of Dan Marino, the Miami Dolphins. Tells you kind of what era that was, that he was starting to like football, and he wanted to just engage with the game a little bit more. He would be reading things and he would have questions. Is that really true? They're saying this player is great at this or that. So when he started to be able to get access to more information, he started to create a database of NFL history just for fun. And eventually what that led to was him getting DVDs of games and then writing down everything that happened. And once we started to get the rise of the internet and message boards and things like that, he connected with other fans, some of them, Sam Monson being one of them, Steve Palazzolo, another, a guy named Ben Stockwell as well. And he started to connect with some of these people on these websites and talk about football. And so he came up with this idea to build a little team that would grade all the players. And this was entirely just for fun because they wanted to know who really is the best left tackle in the league. Like, are these Pro Bowls being handed out correctly? Because a lot of times it was essentially on just what broadcasters would say about players. And so eventually, as he got more and more excited about this, and he got a tech person named Ian Perks to start building a website for him and just started posting their information on the website, just that they had tracked themselves and information that they had essentially just written down in Excel sheets and then posted on the internet. But John Berger, who worked for the New York Giants, he found this information and reached out to Neil Hornsby and said, "Where did you get this? Like, how did you come up with it?" Because he noticed that the player participation, the snap counts, were really accurate to what they had inside the Giants building. And so he wanted to know, like, how are you guys doing this? Do you have secret access to the film or something? And it turned out that they were doing it just off of TV broadcasts, but they were doing it really diligently and really well. And at the time, and this just shows you how far we've come with analytics, at the time, the NFL was not releasing the player participation data. You remember this? We used to have to wait till the end of the year. And then we would go, oh yeah, that cornerback played 47% of snaps or whatever. And so
more specifically knowing what plays they were in the game for. And yes, that's the trick. I know I was reading that chapter in the book, and you point out, like, if a linebacker played 30% of a team's plays, well, you still have to watch 100% of the plays to find those 30. And what PFF did, they lined the data up, and you could figure out, all right, well, I only need to watch these plays. That's when the guy's on the field, which for guys in pro scouting is invaluable. You're going to cut their work time in a third just trying to find the guys on the field. You know what it's like, especially back then before you had HD. Just seeing the numbers on the all 22 can sometimes be a pain in the butt. That takes as much time as grading the plays and grading the players half the time.
Yeah, and that's one of the funny stories in the book is that one of the guys came up with a whole system of who wears what color gloves, what color shoes, and had this entire way of cross-checking who was on the field and became, one of their most important people because he could get it right so many times. But yeah, you're exactly right that way back then, and it sounds like we're talking about the dark ages here. It wasn't that long ago. We're only talking about early 2000s here. And, but it did save time because if you have quality control people, if you have the pro scouts and they're looking for, all right, we need to prepare against this player. When is he on the field? Instead of watching every single snap, then you could say, all right, well, he was on the field these plays. Let's go find that on our film, and it saved time. And that's really the story of PFF. Most people know it as the grades that you can find, the data that you see showing up in media all the time, the personalities that they've had through the years that have gone on shows, your show, my show, 100 times. But what I think most people don't realize is how that fundamental thing of saving teams time and making their operations more efficient led to PFF getting in 32 NFL buildings. And now they influence every single play on every single game plan from every single NFL team, UFL team, CFL team, almost every single college team in the world, because they have created these systems that were on that same fundamental basis. It's not just the player usage. Now it's going 50 layers deeper than that, but that was the way that it started with the New York Giants.
Yeah, I think what fans see and they hear about is the grading from Pro Football Focus, and that's what, to your point, gets clicks, it gets interviews, and it gets stuff like that, and it gets publicity. But their business is really the data part of it. You could take the forward-facing media grade stuff, and literally they could stop doing it. What they provide for NFL teams from a data sorting perspective, like someone like me, I have access to PFF Ultimate, right? So you're able to watch the opponent players, watch college players in a third of the time before this stuff existed. And really, it's the data and the sorting that they provide to these NFL teams that really, to me, is going to keep them around forever. And maybe someone buys them eventually, however this ends up going. That's the backbone of what they do, not the grades.
Yeah, and the grades are an interesting thing too, because when they first started doing the grades, and John Berger for the Giants mentioned this, the coaches were very offended by the idea that people could watch and grade their players. However, as the years have gone by, and at first I totally understand it, why there would be questions about the grades, and there were questions in the media about the grades, because like, who's doing this? How do we know? But as they created more and more layers to the system, the NFL became more influential about what they were doing. So you would have coaches, players, teams giving them feedback, and then they were able to hire people to come on that had NFL experience. So no longer was it Sam Monson just watching a game and writing down what he thought the guy should be graded on a play. The offensive coordinator of the Atlanta Falcons now, Zach Robinson, he worked there in the early days, and so did actually Bobby Slowick, who is the offensive coordinator for the Texans. Both of these guys in their early days in their career, Zach Robinson, right out of the NFL, worked there and helped train them on how these things should actually be graded. And as they got more revenue, they added more people to their system. So now when a quarterback gets graded, and this doesn't mean you have to agree with every grade for every single game that you've ever watched, but when a quarterback gets graded, you have an initial grader who has gone through a lot of training, and there's a huge booklet, which I imagine is a PFF or a PDF now, but once upon a time was a 500-page booklet and so forth of every single play and how it should be dealt with. And things always come up in football that are weird. But then there is a cross-checking layer as well, which was, and I think it still is, but I know he's working in the UFL as well, was Bruce Gradkowski, who played in the NFL. He would cross-check all of the grades for all of the quarterbacks on a given week. And if there was an issue with a grade, then they would have a discussion about where it should be. They would rewatch the play. And so it wasn't just some guy in his basement watching this on a grainy film and putting down, this is a 1 or 2 or whatever. And what I found too is that now there is a lot of different viewpoints on the grades around the NFL, where, as you said, some teams would rather just not look at them and they can delete that line in all of the data. Whereas when I talked to the general manager of the Vikings, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, about it, he said that he uses them as kind of a cross-check method for their own grades, where you can look at it and go, all right, our offensive line coach has our center graded out as this for this game, but PFF had it completely different. So is that because PFF doesn't realize someone else missed an assignment, which does happen for sure. There's no question. There are holes in the system. They've tried to fix as many as they can over the years, but you're never going to have it exactly because you don't know the assignments. But if there might be a difference of some bias on the coaching staff as well, where, hey, he drafted this guy, or he's a big fan of this guy, loves his heart, loves his grit, and maybe gives him a little more credit. So they want to know, how does that match up? I think the same thing goes for what their scouts say about free agents and potential players they could bring in. And what Kwesi told me was that he studied their grades and data when it came to the draft, when he first got hired by the San Francisco 49ers, and presented them with some of the information of what type of grades correlated to success in the NFL. And there was a decent amount of correlation. And then now he's working with that data to even adjust it to try to factor for some of the things that are difficult to know. So the way that it's grown has really been super influenced by the NFL in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a couple of things you mentioned there that I wanted to kind of dig in a little bit more. These GMs now have to deal with the grades because, when agents call to negotiate contracts, do you know what they cite when they call the general managers? They'll get a cite PFF data. So they're good, whether they like it or not. And to your point, I know some coaches I've talked to here, they say, all right, yeah, I use them as a basis. It makes sense. But GMs have to deal with it because these are what agents are using now when they call up and they try to negotiate some of these contracts. And like, yeah, well, he had the most pressures last year when, gosh, 7 years ago, nobody knew what a pressure was. Nobody tracked these things. Now, that means more than sacks sometimes when guys go and negotiate some of these contracts.
No, you're completely right. And I talked to an agent for the book who, it was one of the early contract negotiations he was in. He was looking for anything that could make his case for a special teams player, because how do you use statistics other than what? Tackles? But that doesn't really tell the story. No. But PFF was analyzing each special teams play and grading it out. And that was able to give him a hand in that conversation. And well, going to the table and saying, hey, my guy's an 84 doesn't really totally change the game for the team, because they're going to have their own opinion and so forth, and try to keep the price as low as possible. But I also think it influences just in general how we perceive players as an entire society of football watchers. Think about offensive line. So I talked to an offensive line coach in this, Paul Alexander, a legend in the offensive line community. And what he told me was, if you want to make the Hall of Fame now, you're going to have great PFF grades, because it's the only way that the world really can get data on this. And he actually, you would think he'd be like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. But he looked at it a totally different way, where he reached out to Neil Hornsby to try to help him adjust the offensive line grades to get them as accurate as he could. And he at one point watched every play back from the Cincinnati Bengals where he was coaching, and then looked at their grades and only found a handful that he really strongly disagreed with how they had graded it out. So even though, again, it's not perfect, I think that even a lot of the coaches find that it's a similar methodology to what they're using. And the one other point about how some coaches use it, the way Paul Alexander would use it is he would look at the individual plays and how they graded them out. And he could just take the zeros, which means plays where nothing really happened. You didn't really win. You didn't really lose. You just sort of did what you were supposed to do. So he could throw those out, and he could look at where it was a plus or a minus to teach his players. So where a guy's getting a minus consistently, well, what's happening? Can I look for trends? Can I sit down with this player and say, all right, all these minuses. So once again, instead of watching 1,000 snaps, maybe he's only watching 50, 60, 70 of minuses. I guess you don't want that many minuses, but he's watching those to be able to look for trends to help him coach and be more efficient. So there are a ton of different ways that the NFL and different people have used these grades that are not exactly the way we do, where we go, oh, the guy had an 85. He must have had a good game like that. Obviously, that's not exactly how they're doing it.
Yeah, football season is coming, and so is the next college semester. If you need funding, a Citizens student loan could help you pay for 100% of your school certified cost. Get your rate quote in about 2 minutes at citizensbank.com/pay-for-college. And it's funny, you mentioned the sorting, and that when the second question, I talked about how you can sort data, as someone that does a lot of work on the draft. I'm one person. I don't have a staff. I can't watch every snap for every game for all these guys. So this is just inside my process. And it's funny you brought it up. I will literally go for the offensive linemen. I will watch all of their, and the way for people that don't understand, PFF will basically has neutral grades for plays where guys either, they're in the backside of play, they don't really impact the play, or it's a neutral type of thing. Then you can get anywhere from +5 to +2.0, +0.5 to +2.0, or -0.5 to -2.0, right? For grades. And that's how you kind of go deviate from like your zero average. And that's how they grade, right? So what I'll do when I try to watch these college players, I'll watch all the positively graded plays and all the negatively graded plays. And it really does give you a good idea. All right, here's what the guy's good at. Here's what the guy's bad at. And if you can have those two pieces of information, everything else kind of falls into place.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And sometimes what Paul Alexander told me is he would sit down with the player and they would say, I don't care about this PFF thing. And he would say, all right, let's watch these plays that they graded negative on you, and you tell me where they're wrong. Right. And then by the end of that session, okay, all right, so forth. But that type of stuff from a scouting perspective is a total time saver. And then you got kind of go to the other part where I actually don't think it made the book, but I had an XFL coach tell me that one of the things that he did was it XFL, UFL, one of the FLs that was not the NFL, told me that what he would do is after they got a couple of weeks of data into their season, that they would look at the other team's negative plays and try to identify where have they made mistakes, and we could take advantage in our game planning. So maybe we didn't plan initially, or wouldn't have planned certain concepts that attack a strong safety, for example. But, what we've noticed is that all of his negative plays, they are, having one certain trend or one route combination he's struggling with. So let's dial that up, knowing that we've seen it on tape using these grades. So the way that the NFL is applying, and think about this is just tip of the iceberg with the way that the NFL is using this stuff. This is their least favorite part, the grades, when it comes to the coverages, the route combinations, all those things. One of the ways that Neil Hornsby got the NFL's attention was that he and Ian Perks, the tech guy, they created this tool that could draw up the plays based on the tracking information and what types of routes were run. And so that right there really caught the NFL's attention. Like, wait a minute, you can basically give us the chalkboard drawing of every play based on your data. And that is a complete game changer right there for us to be able to see that and not have to draw up the plays by ourselves or write down by hand all of the route combinations, the coverages, the percentage of coverages, which, I'm jealous that you have an ultimate subscription. They didn't give me one for writing the book, but this, you can look up how often did the Giants play cover one in a given game. You can look that up.
And not just in a given game. It's how often you play cover one on third down. How often you play cover one on second down. And that saves these pro personnel departments so much time where, look, you're still going to dive into it because there are different variants of these coverages. You can cover different ways and all that stuff, of course. But, to give you that head start on, when you first start the process, it really is just such a time-saving situation.
So then when we think about the second part of this, like what has been the impact? It's not just, hey, these coaches are saving time and that's how PFF got here. It's also when you think about the game planning process, coaches before would have installed their offenses and defenses and they would have run them out there against other teams and they would have tried to put in some stuff that they had scouted, right? But now this is like a high stakes type of data technology, my information versus your information on the weekly basis. And what you're asking from the coaches is to analyze the data and where you can find weaknesses in the opponent and then apply that to game plans. You're also asking players, and I think that players now have to have higher IQs about football than ever before in history, because each week these game plans are getting more detailed or complicated or adding and subtracting different things because they are trying to use this data to apply to their game planning. And just to give you an example from the book, the Philadelphia Eagles, when they won the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots, one of their plays they found in the PFF data just a couple days before the Super Bowl. And they found that a certain type of motion the New England Patriots defense had struggled against. They went back and watched the plays, implemented it. Zach Ertz touchdown. That's what the cover of the book is. Vikings fans were not happy with me that a Philadelphia Eagle scoring a touchdown at US Bank Stadium. Probably Giants fans wouldn't be either, but there's a reason, Giants fans. It's not because I like the Eagles or anything. It's because that touchdown was influenced by PFF data.
What's up? I'm John Wall.
And I'm CJ Toledano, and we're starting a new podcast presented by DraftKings called Point Game. We're now joined by three-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year, elite bucket getter. Let's please welcome Jamal Crawford to Point Game. King of the Court one-on-one tournament. If they had it back in your prime, do you think you could have took it all?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I could have took it all, but I think I would have shocked a lot of people. I think Kobe and everybody in their prime, Kobe would win a one-on-one contest.
Yeah, because you got to think, he's going to guard. He don't care about guarding.
He's going to guard.
He's going to guard. Like, you see him in the Olympics, he's going to guard. And then on top of that.
Like that, see that?
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sam Cassell to Point Game.
I remember you came in my room crying, tears, crying. I mean, he was in a culture shock. And then he's going through withdrawals about winning.
Remember what I told you? I said, OG, you think I can get paid and go back and play in college because it ain't it?
Check out Point Game with John Wall and CJ Toledano on the iHeartRadio app, DraftKings YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Yeah, and the interesting thing for fans that don't understand how this process works with the coaches, you can literally sort the plays in a certain way. Then all you have to do is click on the number of plays, and they'll stack and populate all those plays so the coaches can watch, which again allows you to spot some weaknesses. For example, just to give fans an example of what I'm talking about, you can go look at for the opposing team all the explosive plays they gave up, right? And then you can say, oh, well, look, this is a weakness. This is where they're weak. And then you can customize your game plan, to your point, Matthew, based on where they've struggled before, when in the past, just putting all that stuff together can be such a time-consuming and frankly, difficult process.
And not only that, but if you're a team, you're looking at your own data and going, where did we give up explosives and how can we fix it? So it's like, we know what you know, what we know. So how do we decide what we're going to do? And that's really been quite the change. The comparison that I've made to it is, I don't know if you're a fan of the game of chess, but I kind of got into the game of chess during the pandemic, as many people did. And what I found just watching YouTube and learning about some of the great chess players is that computers have given all the answers to chess. And so a lot of times it's which computer game plan are you going to use, but the other person probably knows it. So how can you change it ever so slightly to throw them off of their preparation? It feels the same way here, where the game planning has now, and I think coaching in general has now increased in its value even more. And not to say that coaching wasn't always super valuable in football, but I think that that's even gone up and up and up. And the coaches who are better at preparing, better at game planning, better at analyzing this data are getting a significant edge over any team that isn't.
It's funny. I think one of the chapters you interview Kevin Clark, right, who does a great job now. He does the Omaha Productions podcast with Wall Street Journal for a long time. And, he didn't really divulge anything because I don't think any of us really know. But a lot of the stuff that teams are able to do easily with the PFF data is stuff that the Patriots and Bill Belichick used to dig through the data and do on their own. Like Ernie Adams is like the man of mystery over there. This is like the type of stuff that he did. This is the type of stuff that John Berger did when Belichick was the defensive coordinator for the Giants in the 80s, right? Where you can find these little weaknesses in opposing game plans. And it really does. It gave an advantage, I think, to the staffs that are able to dive in and find this stuff. So now, while the weaknesses, I think, you can find them a little bit easier based on all the information and technology that we have. But to your point, I think how you then go about trying to exploit teams with all the extra information that's available is what makes the coaches' jobs a little bit more different and a little bit more difficult based on what they were doing 20 years ago.
No, I absolutely agree. And that's where, is it paralysis by analysis as well? And how do you create your processes for evaluating yourself and other teams? Because those processes, whatever they were 15, 20 years ago, have had to completely change now to the way that they do it. You did remind me, though, when it comes to what we think we know on the outside versus what is actually going on inside NFL buildings, because one of my friends who read the book texted me and said, I never would have thought Tom Coughlin would have been the analytics guy or whatever. But because in the book, John Berger talked about how the more they got the information, the more that Tom Coughlin wanted to go to John Berger and say, hey, can you get PFF to give us this? Can we find out that? To the point where PFF assigned one person just to answer Giants questions. And they, in the Super Bowl, the second time they went to a Super Bowl, they gave that guy a ticket to the Super Bowl because they felt he was so valuable in helping them out to answer whatever Tom Coughlin's questions were. And that's, I think, maybe the misnomer about analytics and coaches is that coaches, most of the time, if you say, I have some information that can help you beat the other football team, they want it. And that's how this thing really grew, is because the coaches wanted more information. They also wanted it to be accurate. And so they wanted to help. They wanted to give them feedback. Hey, you should look at this. You should look at that. And then it just continued to snowball and get bigger and bigger from there until Chris Collinsworth bought the company in 2014. And that's where it really exploded. That's where they could have the money to do the college side of things, which has, as you mentioned, really changed the way the teams evaluate in the draft.
Yeah, I think people's eyes gloss over when people talk about like win percentages and, tenths of a percentage in terms of success and not success. And I think when people hear stuff like that and, you set up all these spreadsheets and people are like, oh, analytics, roll your eyes, it's football, whatever. Why are you making it so complicated? All it is data and information. And if coaches can figure out a way to take that data to allow them to game plan better and actually coach up the football better, that's what they're looking for. I think people think about it the wrong way when they think, oh, the NFL is becoming a computer sport. That's not what it is. It's the coaches utilizing the information and data at their disposal to then being able to coach up the players to make them more effective with that data. It's not that it's becoming an equation. It's that they just have more information to game plan better.
Well, and I think that a lot of the talk about analytics has been so much focused on fourth down that that's become really the center conversation. Is your coach analytical or not did he go for fourth down or not, which is not really a great way to look at it. Although there are plenty of signs that we can see of where there has been influence, because I think that data maybe from PFF didn't directly influence the overall thinking of like the entire world about football, including inside front offices. But one of the things Thomas Dimitrov said, former Falcons general manager, was that you had to prove it all of a sudden. Like if you had an opinion inside of a room, you couldn't just say, this is my take. Once the more information was available, then the conversation went, here's my take. But now I really have to explain on paper why. And you're always going to have the scouts who are watching and they're giving their analysis and so forth. But if you're debating, should we extend this player or that player, and how much money should we extend them for? It's not just, I like the guy, so we got to extend him, or I'm very passionate about this opinion, the pounding the table that you always hear about. It's all right, we have to go through this in a more analytical way. We've seen it really show up in contracts where the money gets spent in the NFL, where the draft capital gets spent in the NFL. And so it's not just when it comes to something like fourth downs, but even with fourth downs, when you deeply study them, which there has been so many analytics people over the years who have, you find that the league was behind on the decision making. And I'll give you a funny example. I was watching the 96 Super Bowl the other day, because why not? It was the Patriots and the Packers, and the Patriots are down 2 touchdowns with 3.5 minutes left, and Parcells punts, and you go like, what are we doing? Oh yeah, it was 1996. Like, he never would have punted today. And most of the time now they're doing it in the correct analytical fashion. But if one goes wrong, as it did for Dan Campbell, then, well, now you're, doing it wrong because of the results. But over the long haul, the NFL has become much smarter with these decisions and more efficient because they've studied them to the point where now a number of NFL coaches have their analytics person in the box upstairs giving their input. Doesn't mean that they always agree with them and do it. But I think I want to say that Indianapolis, I hope I'm not crediting the wrong team, was maybe the first to have the guy with the headset on where he was telling Frank Reich, who no one thinks of as being like Albert Einstein down there or something, like a old, NFL player, but he wants to know, what is the data telling me? And Philadelphia was another team that had that information as well when they decided to go for those fourth downs that really set off the league, I think, paying more attention to it in 2017.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, I do not believe they're allowed to have like a computer up there and running stuff live during the game, where they're taking more things into consideration based on game flow and things like that, and they're redoing the formulas. You have to go in there with your physical sheets of paper and data, and then you work off of that, because the NFL still has a lot of rules up there with, how much access to information and film, frankly, you have upstairs in the coach's booth, and what kind of information can be sent down to the coach, correct?
Yeah, I believe that's right. I think that they can have their printed off sheets that would have all of their scenarios. And there are formulas that people have come up with them. And I am a writer and not a mathematician, so I don't entirely understand how this is figured out. But, there's a lot of things that people say you can't factor for that they've already factored for when you're doing your individual team sheet. So, well, you can't factor for who you're playing. Well, you kind of can. You can't always factor for, hey, our left guard got hurt, so we don't want to run on whatever down. Or, for example, a Vikings one last year where they punted late in the game that Josh Dobbs had thrown 3 interceptions. And maybe you didn't really want to be too aggressive in that scenario where you'd already thrown a bunch of interceptions. But most of the time, I think that they could give you a more precise, in a very imprecise and small sample and random world. All you're trying to do is over 100 fourth downs, shift your success ever so slightly to try to win one more game, to try to result in a handful of more points than you would have before. And I think on what's really been interesting to me is that I would have thought, like the NBA, where scoring has just gone up, and where MLB, where everybody was hitting home runs and so forth, I would have thought that the NFL would suddenly be 54-49 scores all over the place. But it really hasn't become that we haven't seen some crazy explosion, because as always is the case for football, it's the push and pull of the offense and defense. So the fourth down, people are going for it to try to score more, but the teams are game planning more for those fourth downs, and they're ready for them, and they can take advantage of the failures. And that's why we love this game so much, is because the history of it is always these like ebbs and flows. And the game has clearly changed a lot when it comes to this. And yet it hasn't changed so deeply fundamentally like we've seen with other sports that have been influenced by analytics.
Yeah, one side adjusts, the other side of the ball adjusts back, right? And last year we actually saw, I think it was the fewest points that we've had scored in the NFL in a long time. The defense had a real renaissance last year, so it's fun to see. One more thing on the grades, and then let's kind of talk about where the company is now, and then we'll talk about the Vikings a little bit. I think what people miss with the grades, I don't care about like the raw number, like a 92. Okay, whatever, that's fine. How many drops did a player? Well, how do they rate drops? What's a drop? What's not a drop? Guys, like that stuff's not all that important. The point is that you now have a point of comparison to compare player A to player B with the same set of rules, right? You can keep track of, like, I can manually keep track of drops for the Giants, but you know what? If I don't know what the guys on the other teams have in terms of drops, what does those numbers really mean? The reason to me that this stuff's valuable is that you get a point of comparison to compare the players. For you, you cover the Vikings, you want to see how those players compare to the players on the other team, because that's who you're trying to beat, right? And I think even though, to your point, they're going to make mistakes, the grades aren't perfect, nothing's going to be foolproof. If you have a basic point of comparison to start, it makes all the difference in the world for someone like me and you that doesn't have a pro personnel staff to go back and watch a billion plays.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about publicly with the grades is maybe there's some sort of metaphor with music or something, right? Where the general fan knows a couple of chords on the piano, but to really understand it, you have to be able to play Mozart. And that's the unfortunate part, a little bit of the grades, is that you have to understand all the strengths and weaknesses and what they tell you and what they don't tell you. Just for example, I was talking to one high-ranking NFL person, I think it was off the record, so I won't say who it was, who basically told me, we're not good at grading defensive backs either. Like, our guys are not good at it. PFF's not good at it. And on a year-to-year basis, Adoree Jackson could be the best graded or the worst graded, but a lot changed. He was used differently, for example.
And they will say that,
years,
by the way. They say their defensive back grades are very volatile, and they're trying to, and I forget if, I don't know if they've done this yet, but I was talking to Steve Palazzolo, and they're like, yeah, we're trying to incorporate, like, how do you grade other teams not throwing at the player because he's so good? Like, how do you incorporate that? It's a very difficult thing to do.
It is. And that's a great point. It's like, you can only grade the plays that they were involved with. It's hard to grade the plays that they weren't involved with. And ESPN tried to create some receiver metrics with that sort of, like, were they open even if the ball didn't go their way, using the tracking data, which is a whole nother, thing that's on its way that had not arrived really yet when I was writing the book, but that's adding all new layers and creating new challenges of, well, the tracking data says you had this many pressures. PFF says you had this many pressures. Is the guy good or not? Is something that we're going to have to work through in the coming years, I guess. And teams do as well. The teams are hiring in mass analytics people just to be able to handle this stuff. Like, what can we do with this tracking data? We figured out what we could do with the PFF stuff. How can we combine the two? How can we pair them for that information? But I think with each individual position, like, there's strengths and weaknesses. You have to understand that if a quarterback gets a lot of zeros, as we were talking about, a lot of routine plays and checkdowns, his grade might be higher than a guy who has a lot of great plays and some more down plays. But the quarterback who has the great plays is probably going to win more than the guy with a bunch of zeros. And we just have to kind of know that. Like, sometimes it's almost like PFF is expected to have every single answer baked into a grade. But what I have found, and it's like, well, we can use our brain, right? And what I have found personally from covering the, an NFL team inside the building and so forth, is what their data has done for me is allowed me to ask a lot of questions to try to answer where the holes are in the grades. And I'll give you an example.
And by the way, the funny thing, real quick, I didn't interrupt you. I bet you when you ask those questions, the team already knows about it too. And they're like, yeah, we know. And then they already have the answer ready, right?
Well, and a lot of times I don't even need to say, hey, the PFF grade says this. But I will say, having an analytics-based general manager, it becomes a lot easier to say, hey, what's up with this PFF grade? Because he gets where that's coming from. Maybe different than Mike Zimmer in the past, who did not want to be asked about that, which I included in the book.
It was a great quote there on that. That was a great quote.
Yes. And I understand where Zimmer was coming from. Sometimes, by the way, the team will say, we don't care about those grades because they're being asked about a bad grade. And they don't want to say, yeah, we actually think he's bad too. It's no, we've got different information or whatever, rather than saying that. But a good example is, for years, Mike Zimmer would argue in the favor of Anthony Barr. And he would talk about how valuable Anthony Barr was to their operation. Remember, they're the number one defense in the NFL 2017. Those Mike Zimmer defenses were phenomenal when he took over. But if you look at the PFF grades, you would have a tough time parsing through to say where it was special. But the thing about Anthony Barr was he was their green dot player. And so he was making changes and shifts to the defense and adjustments. And he's just a very highly intellectual player. And so all these things that they would do to make their defense difficult on offenses, the adjustments, the checks, the changes, all those stuff, it was all going back to him. Now, the splash plays were maybe not there the way that it might be for some other star players. But if you can have a guy who's, facing Eli Manning, for example, and Eli is trying to make changes at the line of scrimmage, and you're checking the different defenses, and then you mess up Eli Manning, that's a play that you can't put in a PFF grade. And that, I think, was his argument. And, how a team would have to game plan to avoid Anthony Barr's size and speed combination. Like you mentioned, you can't grade the plays they're not involved with, but we know all this. And that's been very interesting to me to fill in the gaps. So, hey, why is his PFF grade not great? And yet the team loves him. Let me try to figure that out. And I think if you have intellectual curiosity about the game, these can guide us in very interesting ways about a lot of players.
All right. Any other anecdotes from the book that you found particularly interesting that you think fans are going to kick out of that we haven't talked about yet?
I think one is just how Chris Collinsworth ended up buying PFF, because that's a question that comes up all the time. Like, wait, Chris Collinsworth owns PFF? Basically, he was trying to prepare for some broadcasts and ran across their information. And he liked it. He thought, oh, this is really interesting. They've got these details and they've got different grades on players. And what is all this? So he emailed their random contact us thing, and it went to Neil Hornsby. He calls Neil Hornsby. He answers. He finds out it's a guy from England, and he thinks that he's just been hoodwinked out of his $10 that he paid to sign up for the website. It's like, well, who is this guy? And then it's only, not too long after that he's buying the company, after he starts to dive into the information, the relationships with teams and so forth, and then built the company from there. But there's 100 different things that had to come together in order for PFF to be the analytics company of the NFL. But that's just one of the funny little things. And I will say too, that as far as Chris Collinsworth goes, another question is like, does he actually work there? Does he just kind of throw in some money to an investment? It is a huge, huge part of his heart. This company, his son works with him there. It's a big part of his family. So I think that he doesn't talk about it a lot. I don't think he wants to, be too public or use NBC to be too much of a vehicle to promote it. But it matters a lot to him, that company, and he's a huge, huge part of its success.
The other anecdote I like, and we kind of glossed over when we talked about with the Giants, how when Neil and John Berger tried to connect to talk about it, why Berger had to have Neil call him, which, by the way, I can confirm that this is absolutely true. So you can tell the story.
Yeah, I think there was something that like they couldn't call out, right? It was like they couldn't make an international call.
Yes, we did not have long distance. Right? We did not have long distance service in the old Giants facility. That is and the reason I know this is true, by the way, the Giants were one of the first teams to play in London in 2007. In fact, we were the first team to play in London in 2007 against the Dolphins. Cleo Lemon started for the Dolphins in that game, legendary Cleo Lemon. And when we were trying to organize that trip, it was the first time an NFL team had went out there since like the early 90s. We couldn't call long distance from the office phones. We all had to use our cell phones. So anyway, tell the story. It's funny.
Oh yeah. Well, that's Neil thought that someone was playing a prank on him, Right. He was like, what do you mean an NFL team can't call me? So he saw the email and he asked his wife, like, do you think that the guys are messing with me? The other guys pretending to be an NFL team. And nope, it was actually John Berger, who, as you mentioned, is one of the great guys. I originally grew up in Buffalo. And after the interview with John Berger for the book, we reminisced about the '90 Super Bowl, of course, with the Bills and Giants and the field goal. That was like my first memory of sports growing up. So yeah, I know it was a little rough. So then I moved to Minnesota, where all we do is win championships here. Had to get away from those 4 Super Bowl losses.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Before we touch on the Vikings, what's next now? You already kind of touched on it with the GPS tracking data, right? How teams are trying to, put that in. I know actually, we had talked to Cynthia Freeland a couple weeks ago, and she was complaining how all the college conferences have different GPS systems, and it kind of makes it impossible to organize all that stuff. But like, what's next for PFF? I know they have PFF IQ now. They try to use AI with stuff. They're doing tracking system stuff with the player tracking. What's the next thing that's going to pop up here that's going to annoy people that don't like change?
Yeah, that is a really interesting question, because PFF did deal with some business stuff. They got a huge investment from an investment firm, and then how the money got distributed was a big challenge for them. And you saw, I'm sure, that some of their biggest names have left over the recent years. So now they're trying to move on from original people that were there and replace them. And it's been a little bit of a dicey situation for them over the last few years. There have been, someone like Eric Eager actually just got hired by the Carolina Panthers, but he was one of their key data scientists who was building IQ as a major part of that operation. So he left to go work for Sumer Sports, which Thomas Dimitrov is at the top of, and then the Panthers hire him. But they've been kind of dealing with a transition here. I think when you go from a small company to trying to be a really, really big company, we've seen this a lot, that it's not an easy challenge. So they're dealing with that. But as far as the amount of information, I just think the hardest thing is going to be when the NFL dumps a huge amount of data on you that has no historical background to study. Right. How do you know if it matters or not? So I'll give you just a totally random example that popped into my head. The receiver from North Carolina, is it Tez Walker?
Tez Walker, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Tez Walker, yep.
So at the Senior Bowl, he ran the fastest of anybody at the Senior Bowl, and he dropped every pass at the Senior Bowl.
Also true.
And but the fact that he ran the fastest, does that mean that he's super fast on the field, like his play speed? Or is that a thing where the play that he was running got him up to peak speed? I'll give you an example in baseball of how this could be weird. An outfielder threw the ball 147 miles an hour from the outfield. You're like, yeah, well, he's running full speed. Like he's not making the same throw as Roberto Clemente at the wall, the famous one where he spins around and throws it to the home plate or something. Like, how do we know exactly if that means that Tez Walker, although I think everyone knows he's fast in general, but just as an example, do we think that says his play speed actually on the field is going to be meaningful? Does that not mean anything? Does it and this is just one of a gazillion examples, but I'll tell you where it's really getting fascinating is what Amazon is doing right now. I don't know if people have watched any of the Amazon Prime broadcasts where they show the data on film, but they have built AI algorithm, whatever things, to identify when players are blitzing based on their locations, based on their movements. And this could be something that if the data is sharp enough, which I think it's on the way and it's been pretty accurate, they can use to train quarterbacks of, all right, this is what the AI is trained to see. How can we train you the same way to see the same things? So normally we would just know, okay, if he's there, then maybe he's blitzing based on your game planning, but this could be much sharper and much more precise about, like, this is the exact locations of this player when this team blitzes, or his movements forward, or whatever it might be. And when we're getting to that level, like, this is now a totally different ball game from just saying, hey, this guy's got a bad grade against, cover one or whatever. And the arms race for data, whoever is ahead is going to, I think, have an advantage. But then the reality of football, that Mahomes guy keeps winning all the Super Bowls.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, but what I do know is that the NFL from now going forward is a data game, and whichever team can harness it the best, I think will get an edge.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
What's up? I'm John Wall.
And I'm CJ Toledano, and we're starting a new podcast presented by DraftKings called Point Game. We're now joined by three-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year, elite bucket getter. Let's please welcome Jamal Crawford to Point Game. King of the Court one-on-one tournament. If they had it back in your prime, do you think you could have took it all?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I could have took it all, but I think I would have shocked a lot of people. I think Kobe and everybody in their prime, Kobe would win a one-on-one contest.
Yeah, because you got to think he's going to guard. He don't care about guarding.
He's going to guard.
He's going to guard. Like, you see him in the Olympics, he's going to guard. And then on top of that.
I'm not guarding like that, CJ.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sam Cassell to Point Game.
I remember you came out from crying, tears, crying. I mean, he was in a culture shock. And then he's going through withdrawals about winning.
Remember what I told you? I said, OG, you think I can get paid and go back and play in college? You think I ain't it?
Check out Point Game with John Wall and CJ Toledano on the iHeartRadio app, DraftKings YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.
No, I'm with you. All right, Giants Vikings week 1. The NFL, I'm sure, is rooting for J.J. McCarthy to start that game. So you have the storyline, Giants pass on J.J. McCarthy week 1 starting against the Giants, and they can pump that up. But is he? I've heard different people that cover the team tell me different things. Do you think McCarthy starts week 1?
I just want to know if Darnold starts week 1, if there will be some sort of New York media attempt at revenge game, like getting revenge on the city or the stadium, or like if we're going to stretch, because I've seen revenge game narratives get stretched pretty far. So maybe to like Darnold's return to New York.
I think the Giants played him when he was starting for Carolina. I think I have to double check that. I think that's happened once already, but I got to double check that.
But to your point, at this moment, Sam Darnold is QB1, and it's not particularly close. When it comes to their OTA practices, there's the starter field and there's the young player backup rookie field. And JJ McCarthy has not made his way over to the starter field yet. It's been actually Nick Mullins is QB2 right now. We are talking at the end of May. So there is a very long way to go here. My observation is that Sam Darnold has looked like a very professional quarterback at practices who is pretty comfortable with what he's doing right now. And he certainly has the arm of a former top draft pick. And JJ McCarthy looks like a rookie who was the youngest quarterback that was taken in this draft. And the Vikings have been very clear. We talked to Josh McCown about this just the other day. They have been very clear about patience. And Josh McCown was in Carolina last year where they pushed a guy who clearly was not ready to play in the NFL out there in Bryce Young with bad teammates, not maybe the perfect scheme and so forth for him. And it was a total disaster. And I think that was influential to why Kevin O'Connell wanted to bring in McCown, as he had that experience watching it all go wrong for Bryce Young. And they want to avoid that. I would be at this point, and this is right now, you can ask me before the game, maybe I'll feel differently, but I would be very surprised if JJ McCarthy is starting week 1 because of that. Now, week 7, that might be a different story, but I think that they're going to want him to go through that process of watching Sam Darnold prepare, because say what you want about Sam Darnold, he's a professional quarterback. He's won games in the league. He's played for Kyle Shanahan. He's had some bad circumstances before. I'm not saying that he'll be the next, whatever, Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield, but he is a professional quarterback, and he's handled this situation really professionally in that way as well, as a mentor role or whatever you want to phrase it as for JJ McCarthy. So give him an opportunity to see how a game plan is done, see the bright lights from the sideline at first. And we always want to push these guys. We just no matter who it is, we got so excited about him in the draft, like get him out there. But I don't think that's always the best plan for everybody. It worked for CJ Stroud, but for other quarterbacks, it's better to develop for a couple of years. And I think just even from the standpoint of throwing the football, what you see in practice is JJ McCarthy throws it really hard, and he throws it really hard every single time, no matter what route we're talking about. So you can see the physical talent But Brian Dable would know all about this with Josh Allen. You draft a young guy who's got a ton of talent, who's super raw. He's a 5-star recruit. He's, the Michigan quarterback. Like, he's got the pedigree, but he doesn't have the refinement yet. Yeah. So we just have to allow that to come to fruition rather than demanding that he gets out there right away.
I'm not going to call myself a Sam Darnold truther, but I was a fan of his coming out. You mentioned he was in some very bad situations in New York and then in Carolina. Based on people you're talking to in the organization, do they think that, you guys have a pretty good ecosystem there in Minnesota? You have a very good offensive coach, but you mentioned McCown, really good wide receivers, a good offensive line. I mean, this is one of the best situations you can get put in if you're a quarterback trying to restart your career. Do they think that Sam Darnold can play well enough to keep McCarthy on the bench for maybe even longer than that, 6-7 week period you're talking about?
I do think that they have a really tough schedule to start the season, which is going to be the true test of whether McCarthy, is going to get out there early or not. But with Sam Darnold in general, I don't love to make excuses for quarterbacks because I think that the great ones will take a bad situation and make it good.
Yeah, the great ones can, but the above average or good ones, middle, I think they really struggle with it,
If you are the 15th most talented player, can you be pushed into the top 10 or into the bottom 10? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Now, he hasn't been great, but I mean, we're talking about statistics. So allow me to break a statistical rule here and talk about like his last whatever number of starts. This is like not a good thing to do, but his most recent performance, he was 8-9 with a really miserable situation in Carolina with something like a 90 quarterback rating, which sounds like normal average NFL quarterbacking. And if you're talking about giving him Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, who I don't think enough people are talking about, TJ Hawkinson will return from his injury. Aaron Jones is here. They have a pretty solid offensive line for the first time in a while. And they have a scheme that is designed to get great wide receivers open. I'll infuse some data here for you. I was just writing about Justin Jefferson and his contract thing the other day. And there was a chart of the PFF data about coverages and how receivers perform against different coverages. Justin Jefferson was only in the realm of Julio Jones when it came to beating both man coverage and zone coverage. If you have a receiver who cannot be covered, no matter what type of coverage you use, I'm going to throw this out there as a hot football take. That's helpful to a quarterback. And I sat there and watched Case Keenum throw to two of the best wide receivers in Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen and have a great season. This guy is much more talented than that. I don't think you're ever going to get rid of the Sam Darnold moments. When I was watching back his games in Carolina, even the ones that he won, there were back foot throws that went 40 yards down the field for interceptions that were totally unexplainable. I think he tries to do too much with all of that talent. Sometimes He did it at USC. He's done it in every stop. So you're not going to be able to contain him, but could you make it into a less interception prone Jameis Winston type of situation where, he throws a lot of touchdowns. There's a lot of mistakes, but if it's not 30 interceptions, it could be pretty good. And I guess from my perspective, the message to Vikings fans in general is of course you're going to have to be patient, but it might be almost thematic with the Vikings history with guys like Randall Cunningham and Jeff George and so forth showing up here, Case Keenum, but it might be a pretty fun season to see the roller coaster that is Sam Darnold, but also an opportunity to see somebody completely change the narrative about their career because of the situation that they're in. I think that's a very real possibility. And yes, people within the Vikings do think that about Sam Darnold. And even, some of the receivers have said like, oh, you know what? It's going pretty smoothly out there from maybe what we thought coming from Kirk Cousins. And if you want to spice it up a little, I think Kirk Cousins' numbers were pumped up pretty good by Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and Adam Thielen. Not saying he's not a really good quarterback, but it certainly didn't help him or didn't hurt him in this latter half of his career to have some of the absolute best wide receivers. I think that could help someone like Sam Darnold as well.
Two more quickies. When is TJ Hawkinson, you think, going to make it back?
Definitely not week one. I would be really shocked if he came back week one. That injury happened late in the season, and then he had to wait to have surgery because the MCL was hurt as well.
Right.
So they decided to let the MCL heal before they did the ACL surgery. This is your medical portion of the podcast, but that's just my understanding of how that works. Don't ask me what any of that is, but that's why the delay happened. And so we haven't seen him do anything. I just wouldn't expect him out there for week 1. So I think you might be getting Robert Tonyan. Maybe he looks pretty good out there. I'm not kidding. Like Robert Tonyan actually looks pretty good out at OTAs. So him or Johnny Munt.
All right, very good. And then finally, Brian Flores had to be creative, is the word I'll use on defense last year and how he operated. I feel like some of the effectiveness started to slip away a little bit towards the end of the year as teams figured out what they were doing with a lot of either their 8-man drops or a lot of their big-time pressure packages. I know they added some guys to the defense to try to make the talent a little bit better. What do you think this Vikings defense looks like this year and in year 2 with Brian Flores?
Yeah, what we saw last year was if you are a good quarterback, it was fine for you. If you are not a great quarterback, Brian Flores took your soul, or experienced would be maybe another way of putting it as well. That the Justin Herberts, the Jared Goffs, they didn't really have a whole lot of problem because at that point it came down to just talent. And the Vikings also had some injuries at the end of the season. They lost Byron Murphy Jr., who was their top corner last year. And when he was out, the depth was just not there. Depth is still a problem for this defense, but they lost Danielle Hunter, which is enormous, one of the best players in the NFL. But sometimes on defense, I'm sure you've seen this happen a number of times before. If you have 3 guys that are B+ or 1 guy who's A+, the 3 guys that are B+ are going to be more valuable for you. That it's usually about what you can't do or your weak links, the things that hurt you the most. So you can have Lawrence Taylor over on the edge, but if nobody can cover behind him, it's not going to still work out for you all that well. So I think what the Vikings have done is that they've shored up some of those little areas that consistently hurt them last year. All respect to Jordan Hicks as a player. Giants have done battle with Jordan Hicks for a long time, but it was on the older side. So they bring in someone like Blake Cashman, a little more spry, can do a little more in coverage, that type of thing. They bring in a corner, Shaq Griffin, who is not like an elite corner, but a starting caliber player in the league that could play a little more man coverage for them. So they don't have to rest on their zone coverage all the time. They can ask to be a little more man heavy. Things like that. Bringing in Grenard, drafting Dallas Turner, bringing in Andrew Van Ginkel as well, who not a lot of people know Andrew Van Ginkel. Most people go, that can't be his real name, right? It is. But he was one of the most versatile players in the NFL last year and a guy who graded extremely high by PFF. So I think they've just added these little pieces that have made them a little deeper, maybe more flexible. They could get Harrison Smith off the field occasionally and move Josh Metellus back to a traditional safety position. I think it's going to be a stronger defense. If you look at the opposition that they're going to play, it might not rank higher because it is a very tough schedule. The NFC North is just a bear.
Yeah,
Get it? A bear. It's really tough. And so that they might end up with the 15th best defense, but actually be a pretty good unit. As far as week 1, though, I mean, who knows what type of blitzes Brian Flores has spent all offseason coming up with.
Absolutely. The book is called Football is a Numbers Game, Pro Football Focus, and how a data-driven approach shook up the sport. Matthew Coller. Matthew, tell the folks where they can find the book and where they can find all the other great work you're doing covering the Vikings.
Yeah, I think the best place to find the book is just Google or Amazon. Just go there. Football is a Numbers Game should pop up with all the wonderful reviews from people who have read it. Appreciate everybody doing that. And purpleinsider.com kind of houses all the different stuff I have. The daily writing there, the podcast, the YouTube, I don't know, did I put my LinkedIn, my MySpace? You can if you're the Office fan, then you can get a woof from me, if you know that reference.
I do know the reference.
Okay. Whatever. It's all there. Purpleinsider.com.
Freedthoughts.blogspot.com. I think this was one of them, right?
Yes.
Football season is coming, and so is the next college semester. If you need funding, a Citizen student loan could help you pay for 100% of your school certified costs. Get your rate quote in about 2 minutes at citizensbank.com/pay-for-college. Matthew, thank you so much for the time. The Giants Huddle podcast is brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. Enjoy your offseason, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Getting ready to take on spring? Make your first move with the reliable performance and power of Steel battery tools. From hedge trimmers and mowers to string trimmers and more, save on select Steel battery tools. Right now, save $50 on the FSA 57 battery trimmer set. real STIHL. Find yours at STIHLdealers.com. With AK-10 battery and AL101 charger, offer valid for limited time only while supplies last. See participating dealer for details.
Hello, iHeart listener. We have a confession to make. Both iHeart and this commercial you're listening to right now would probably sound a heck of a lot better on the new Roku Pro Series TV. It's got side-firing speakers that fill your room with sound, Dolby Atmos audio that puts you right in the middle of the entertainment, and the ability to pair seamlessly with your home theater sound systems that already have surround sound and booming bass. If all that sounds too good to be true, it'll sound even better on the new Roku Pro Series. Your hearing isn't better, your TV is.